Welcome back to the Lunchtime Catch-Up podcast, part 4 of our top 20 Essendon players of the 90s. My name is Grant Hill, and with me is Scott.
Hello, everyone. Great to be back. This is the big finale. I hope everyone is excited about this as much as we are. It feels like it's been a very long 4-part series.
It has.
It's been a lot of hour and a half, an hour and 10-minute episodes. But look, it's been fantastic, obviously, having the likes of Gary and Rowan joining us. And I just wanted to obviously introduce first Rowan Connolly from Footyology, and a big thanks to him for joining us for the 80s and 90s series.
Good evening all. Thanks for having me.
And Gary O'Donnell, obviously, master skipper, fantastic player, fantastic bloke who hates to be complimented. So sorry, Gary, to introduce you that way. But welcome to the show.
All good. Great to be back. And it's almost taken a decade to do this, hasn't it? So good to have it 5-1 tonight.
And obviously, we've got Neil, who commonly known as Knackers from Bomber Blitz, Mr. Training Report Guru. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here again. And welcome back, Grant, from your 1-week suspension.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I had a quick tear in my medulla oblongata, but Doc Reed got me up, so I'm okay.
Yes, well, obviously, last week we made it known that you had Gary O'Donnell at number 11, and it was a forced suspension, which I think we all understand and respect. But Gary was nice enough to let me know that Grant probably should come back this week, so he can insult him direct to his face. So, look, I want to kickstart the show and get straight into it. I'll start with my number 5. We're covering number 5 to the Magic number 1 today. My number 5 will start with Mark Mccurry, who we spoke of last week. Extremely skillful player, great overhead. Probably in the late 90s was just if you wanted to talk just sheer talent, was probably top 5 in the AFL. Could be a game breaker, could play centre line, could play forward, but when forward, he was extremely dangerous. A very classy player. If you're a full forward, you would dream of a guy, of this guy having a ball in his hand. So he was my number 5, and I'll go to you, Rowan.
Hey, my number 5 is a Brownlow medalist, no less, in a premiership year. We all know how good he was. I'm talking about Gavin Wanganeen. 91 to 96, very sadly left to go back to his original club, Port Adelaide. And my memory is at the time that, whilst people appreciated it was a big loss, I think the full impact of that was probably only felt, in hindsight a couple of years later. Certainly I felt that way because I thought, Essendon was right up there and, he was a loss, but they'd cover for it. But I never felt like they really adequately did cover for it. And, you've only got to watch sort of a package of highlights of that 93 season to see just how critical he was to that team. I mean, he wasn't only a defender, he was a playmaker. He had a couple of years, didn't he, where he was used a bit more sort of widely than after he came to settle down in that back pocket. But right from the time he went into that back pocket, he almost sort of remade the role of a back pocket, I thought. And it wasn't just, they're common now, guys that sort of provide that run and rebound, but it was also his aerial ability in that position as well. I mean, some of those amazingly courageous marks he took in that premiership year. He had a great reader of the play, real cat-like reflexes. He was slightly built, but he had a capacity to sort of soak up physical punishment. Kicked the greatest point of all time in the 93 grand final. What a tragedy that didn't go through for a goal. Hit the post in the goal scorer at the Gabba in the 96 qualifying. That was a tragedy too. But, like so many of Essendon's best memories in the 90s are tied up with Gavin Wanganeen. 127 games in the 90s, which puts him in terms of aggregate games in the 90s. He comes in at number 9. So, played a lot more footy in the 90s than most people, and for the bulk of that was one of Essendon's handful of best players. He gave them that flair and attack and creativity that I think they sorely missed without him. And I'd go so far as to say that, had he stayed, I reckon at least one of those two near misses in 99 and 01 definitely would have been a premiership. So wonderful, wonderful footballer. And of course, went on to have just as good a career at Port Adelaide. He's one of the all-time greats, really. And pleasure to watch him play.
Can I ask, Rowan, there used to be this fan rumour, but I don't know if you can validate this. There used to be this fan rumour that Port Adelaide were throwing out a McDonald's franchise to get him.
Yeah, I heard that.
And it went kind of everywhere. And I kind of made the assumption later on that it just wasn't true. But did that ever cross your paths when you're a journalist? That kind of.
I actually put it to him, and he insisted that he was far more a fan of Hungry Jack's, so he wasn't interested in the. No, I don't think I ever confronted him with that directly, but obviously there was plenty of money on offer, but I think it was also the attraction of Port coming into the AFL. That was a club with which he'd got his start, and he was a fantastic servant for Port Adelaide as well. It's a great pity we only got to have him for 6 seasons, but geez, what seasons they were.
He kicked one of the most amazing goals at Princess Park against Richmond. It was basically it was almost like a socket half volley from the boundary line, but it was just one of the most amazing, a bit of luck obviously, but just actually, I was right behind it in the crowd, and to see the angle that he had only to get a goal, he just did some freakish things that, the way he used his body, sort of him and Ramanaskas were kind of that kind of really rubbery shaped, could sort of recover from off the ground so fast, and just a dynamic marking, rebounding player. He's definitely obviously in my top 5. I won't say where he is, but great selection, Rowan.
Sounds like me.
Yep.
Well, I'm with you, Rowan. I am at number 5 as well. One of these players, it's really tough when you get into these top 5 because so many of them are so close together. The thing that I remembered so much about Wanganeen, more than anything else, was his courage. The amount of times he'd just go where he had no right to go, and he'd get crunched. It wasn't as if a lot of the times you see the famous mark by Nick Rewald where he went over the top of the pack and took that great mark, but he didn't actually really get hit. Whereas Wanganeen would go for these marks and he'd just get crunched and he'd get up again. And for someone of such a slight build and small frame, it was incredible what he used to do. But he, as you said, he also had the skill to back it up. And I really do agree with you there. I think he did redefine the back pocket role to a large degree. Mm-hmm. He was one of the first ones that really made it into an attacking position. He was an incredible defensive player. He was always able to get in a spoil or outmark a player, and he was, as you say, really cat-like on the ground. But it was his attacking ability that I think was one of the first real players that showed that and showed what could be made of a role. And that extended to all areas of the back half as well. You'd have that his sort of precedence led to players like Adam Assad and Connor McKenna, who are really now used in a very attacking players. They're negating, but they attack as well. So I would have liked to have had him higher, and I'm sure if he played more than the 6 seasons that he had at Essendon, he would be. As you said, he had a great career at Port Adelaide as well, and it was just a tragedy that he left. It was one of my, I think, I can't really think of too many people that didn't have him as one of their favourite players. Always gave his all and just an amazing player to watch. Just while I'm on a roll here, my number 4 was your one, Scott, with Mark Mccurry. Talked about him a bit last week, and another one of those players that just great to watch. Silky skills, brilliant overhead, and in any marking contest really, and just fantastic by foot as well. A real great all-round player, and another one that's just fantastic to watch.
And Grant, as we go to your number 5, I did forget to show the list of where we're at as far as everyone's countdown. So as you're talking, I'll put up the screen so the YouTube audience can see what our votes were. So Grant,
Okay,
what's
cool.
your number 5?
My number 5, Mark Mccurry. I heard him described as a Cadillac at some stage in his career. He was smooth. He had all of the skills. I think everybody knows the reason why we have him up the pointy end of this. Just a really smooth, talented footballer who I absolutely love to watch. And a small point of interest, I played 18 holes of golf with Mark Mccurry one time at the course. He just came on. I was there by myself on a day off, and it was at the course on in Knox. I forget the name of it, a big links course there in Knox. And I got paired up with Mark Mccurry, as you do.
So,
oh man, I didn't even. He hit a golf ball okay. I'll give him that, but didn't count. But yeah, and I had the joy of playing 18 holes with the man.
Yeah, most of these guys are really multi-talented. I think they've just got the body, the natural hand-eye coordination, and they can do lots of things. I think.
What's funny about that, I actually worked next to Wanganeen when he first started with Essendon. I was in a bookstore in Blackburn, and he actually was working at the next door. So we actually had lunch one time.
Nice.
And he was very, very young, and he was the shyest person I think I'd ever met, but very, very kind and soft-hearted.
He was a Paul Salmon protege too, so he wouldn't have paid.
He did, Gary. You'd appreciate this. I mean, he was incredibly painfully shy, but like he's a guy, in his 40s now, isn't he? But I did the Mongrel footy show with him quite a bit a couple of years back. And, he's such a lovely bloke and very well-spoken and really got his good head on his shoulders. The other one I wanted to ask you about, Gary, too, was Merckx. Like in an age where it's very hard to sort of remain low profile, particularly if you're a former league footballer, he has successfully become the Howard Hughes of former AFL players. Like you don't see him, you can't speak to him. I know the people in the Essendon media department, they're sort of desperately always trying to dig up. Everyone always says, "Oh, what about Merckx? I wanted to do an interview with him," but he's like Howard Hughes. You just never see him.
Yeah,
the club are doing a big documentary for our 150th year in 2021, and I'm at the stage where they interviewed about 60, 70 players, and I went over late last year, and he, to that stage, he hadn't accommodated with them with an interview. So hopefully he did, because we get him on record. But wonderful player. I think on previous telecasts, he was the Silk before Sean Burgoyne was. And Gavin turned up as a really shy bloke. It didn't take long for Mercedes, Mccurry, Kelthorpe, Alorenshaw to get a hold of him and bring him out of his shell a little bit. And I think probably his first girlfriend too that he ended up marrying as well, Stephanie Richards. She certainly brought him to the fore. But look, wonderful player, really shy. I think came from a pretty religious family. His father was a lay preacher, and he lived with Alan Dunn over in Donvale. So quite a few times I'd pick him up and drop him off from the footy club. But I'm not sure whether it was a McDonald's. It may well have been a Time Zone. You know, the game arcade?
Yeah.
That might have been a Time Zone or a couple of Time Zones was on offer, because I think in the McDonald's Corporation you've got to sort of come through the ranks and get to be a manager before you own one, I think. But that was another rumour as well, but not sure how solid that particular rumour is.
That's interesting, because it made me think, I wonder if Sydney lured Buddy Franklin up there with a Time Zone franchise, because not all that long ago, when my son was still, I think he was about 10 years old, but we were at Chatty one day and we went into, whatever the game arcade there was, can't remember if it was Time Zone or not. And I remember looking up, and there's Buddy playing one of the games in the little kiddies video game arcade.
You might have been contributing to his superannuation. He may well have been.
Yeah.
So Gary, what was Wanganeen like to play with? Were you as fearful of him as we were as spectators?
Yeah, look, as you mentioned, actually, the rubber man. He not only at ground level, in the air, he could be out of position, have probably a 1 in 5 chance of marking it, of being able to even bring the ball to ground, and he'd somehow mark it. Just get himself in a contorted position to stretch himself around the opponent, who had 80% of the contest, and Gavin had no right to win it, and he just kept on winning it. So whether there was some knocks on him as well, like he made the back line his own, but when we throw him on the ball, the game would sort of go around him a bit, and so he liked to be at one end of the ground. He had a little bit of a go forward and was okay. It was absolutely fantastic behind the ball, where he could see the whole game. And I think as a player, he got better in the midfield when he had the chance when he was at Port Adelaide at his second stint.
Yeah.
Nice.
So let's go now to number 4. I better actually get my list up and running.
We're all prepared for this.
Professional podcast.
I only had a week to get ready.
So I actually had Dustin Fletcher at number 4. Look, obviously, 400 games.
400 games.
Legend of the club. Mr. Reliable, played. He could play loose, could play tight, could play multiple positions in the back line, whether he wanted small forward or tall forward. Great swing man, can pitch in the ruck. That's had a few experiments of him going forward and looks not too bad. One of the best exponents of the torpedo you would ever want to see, and love to let it fly. But just, he's the guy that has, the Vegemite toast in the car park at training before training and just casually just turns up and does training. And I always felt like Fletcher was the guy that you could just easily sit with and you would not think he was an AFL footballer. Just would be just as relaxed and chilled out as you. And for a guy with so much accolades and premiership players and 400 games, he's one of the most down-to-earth people I think you would ever want to meet. So he is my number 4, and I'll go with you, Ron.
Okay, my number 4 is Michael Long. Rolled up to the club in '89. Was, I reckon, up until probably early '93, as good as he was, and he was very, very good, but he wasn't necessarily always that consistent. And if you remember, he had some issues early in '93 with a few suspensions early in the season, and really
just a touch
sort of cleaned up his act. I mean, not that he was dirty, but he just, I don't know, it seemed to really sort of focus him. And of course, came to an absolute peak at the perfect time in that '93 final series. And who would forget his grand final performance, but the other finals, he was terrific as well. And just that explosive pace, unpredictability of movement, that moment in the grand final where he's just standing there, sort of daring whoever it was to take him on, as Ian Robertson said in the commentary. He again just gave Essendon that sort of explosive quality that other sides found so hard to handle. And then, he continued, once he sort of hit that level in '93, he maintained it. Of course, he missed a year with a major knee op too, unfortunately, but, was playing great footy right up through to the end of the '90s. Magnificent player to watch. There's a few players I've seen play for Essendon in my time following him who I've enjoyed watching as much and who, got the crowd sort of, you could hear the crowd audibly buzz when he went near the ball. Just a fantastic player. The other stuff goes without saying too, not that that's necessarily in the criteria, but, the moment in '95, Anzac Day with Damien Monkhurst, it was a really, really important moment for Australian football, no doubt about that. Just a quick little anecdote. I was actually when he arrived in Melbourne, and it was the end of 1988, or might have been, right at the end of '88, and there'd been that thing where he'd been out in a fishing boat and there was a cyclone or whatever, and they couldn't contact him for a day or two, and there was all this panic about, where he was. But eventually he comes to Melbourne, and I did, for The Age, I did the first interview with him. It was myself and Michael Stevens, who was there for still the Sun. It wasn't the Herald Sun at that stage. And we went and spoke to him, I think it was on a Sunday morning or something. And it was the most monosyllabic interview I've ever conducted. Geez, it was hard work, It was just, so what do you think about this, Michael? Yeah, it's all right. It was that sort of stuff. He was just painfully shy. And I'll never forget, I said, so, what do you know about VFL footy? And he said, I like Mickey McLean. And I said, what about, the big stars, like, say, Dermot Brereton? He goes, see that big blonde-headed bloke? His knowledge of VFL football was fairly thin on the ground. But, look, Gary, everyone who's had anything to do with Longy knows what a ripping fella he is and how funny he is and how intelligent. And he has become such a wonderful, wonderful ambassador for Indigenous people and Indigenous issues. He's a gem. And, we were so lucky to have him, and full credit also to Sheeds and to Noel Judkins and anyone else involved in that for having I shouldn't say courage, but at that time it was seen as a bold recruiting gambit out of the box, and if you have a look at the numbers of Indigenous players who were playing VFL footy the season before Longy arrived, you're talking about, might have been 10 or something. The absolute explosion in recruitment of Indigenous players that came purely off the back of how well he did for Essendon. So, he's just such an important figure in footy in so many ways, but for our purposes, simply as an Essendon player of the 90s, really, really hard to go past him. And that longevity, 136 games in the 90s, which puts him number 5 in the list of most games played in the 90s by an Essendon player.
Yeah.
Impressive.
I remember talking to Halves, and we were talking about Michael Long. It was actually at a sportsman's night that I organised a long, long time ago. But I'm talking to Halves, and we're talking about Longy. And I don't know, Gary, if this is a story and whether it's true, but it still made me laugh. But Halves always said, the funniest thing he ever thought that Longy did was in a team meeting when they were obviously talking tactics. And Sheedy's obviously got the writing on the whiteboard, and Longy's got his hand up and he said, "Can I just ask why it's a whiteboard, not a blackboard, please?" And with a very serious face, and poor Sheeds' face is this is how Harvey's described. He's gone white, and then Longy's obviously just burst out laughing, and then the whole that was just sort of the sense of humour he had. Magical player.
I thought the one that he was famous for was asking. He came off with a bruise one day, and he asked Doc Reed, said, "Look, where is he?" He says, "Well, you're the doctor. You tell me where it is." That's what I remember for. But no, it's a great summation there, Rowan. A couple of things that I really remember about him, particularly in the early days too. There was one thing. First of all, when he first started, he could barely kick it over a jam tin. He really could kick it about 35 metres maximum. He had virtually no power on his leg, and I don't know how they managed to develop it, but in the end, he could kick goals from 50-55, which was an extraordinary achievement from where he actually started. But the other thing I remember when he started too was that he would almost do anything to avoid having a shot for goal. He'd be running in, he'd be 35 metres out, almost directly in front, and he looked to pass it or have passed it over the top, and it must have, Gary might be able to explain a bit more about that, but they must have put a lot of work into just to build up his confidence to tell him, look, when you're positioned, have a shot. And he did do that later on, and really developed his goal kicking to a great degree. And as you said, Rowan, what a tragedy that he did his knee right after he reached top form in the 93 season. And that was the 93 final series, the whole final series. Everyone remembers the grand final, just say, the whole final series was one of the all-time great final series by a player, I thought. Every game he was dominating, and it was just a fantastic player to watch. And just the way he really had no idea what he was going to do. He'd weave and he'd duck and he'd hand pass and he'd kick it in different directions, and incredible player to watch.
He was so physical too. Like for a guy his size, he had quite a, I don't have the word mean streak, but he had quite an intimidating feel. Like, who did he crunch in the grand final with?
Simmons.
Yeah. I mean, that was a dangerous, but that was a heavy collision.
Well, that led to the front on contact rule a bit. I think that was because it might have been a bit before your time, Scott and Grant, but I remember the incident with Neil Sagatchi. Sagatchi, playing his second game for Footscray.
Yeah,
and he got crunched and ended up a quadriplegic out of it. It was and it wasn't that dissimilar from the Simmons incident, and it's one of the all credit to the AFL that they have really eradicated that sort of action out of the game, because that's really somebody could have died.
Yeah, well,
so that's a great thing.
Well, Neil, we know your number 4 is Mccurry, so I might, for the sake of time, I might go to Grant. Just get your number 4 if that's all right.
Longy.
Well, that's easy.
Absolutely, cannot go wrong with Longy. Just a great bloke, and an absolute credit to his heritage. That bloke, seriously.
Okay,
Gary.
And all those stories about Longy are true. It was actually David Whedon on a whiteboard, and he'd written it with a permanent marker. He went to rub it out, and everyone was giving him hell, and Sheed's at the back of the room because Longy was probably giving him the most stick. He said, "Longy, what are you going to do when you're a coach?" He says, "I won't be using a whiteboard. I'll be using a blackboard."
Nice.
But the Bruce Reid one's correct. Look, his sense of humour, he was the gel with the camaraderie at that time when he came in. Shy, but just as he grew in confidence, he was able to just have a real respect amongst the players. Didn't say a lot, but when he did, everyone was just on the edge of their seats, wanting to listen. Grand final 93 on the Thursday night, 2 days before the grand final. Loris Bertolacci, our conditioning and strength coach, had him, or he did his maximum personal best on a squat. So you'll have all these players going, "Oh yeah, no, okay, I've got to put myself in cotton wool for the week. I've got to get up for the grand final." Longy was doing maximum leg squats, 1 rep, 2 days before one of the better games that's been played in a grand final. And like you said, it goes down in folklore. Him, probably Kevin Bartlett, Gary Ablett Senior, the 3 that come to mind that had total final series that dominated and got there. And if he didn't play, we wouldn't have won.
Yeah.
Just the Adelaide game, he was just keeping us in it. In the preliminary final, we don't win a flag if he's not in our squad. So really good to have him around. With the goal kicking, he used to give off a lot. Whether it was confidence, whether it was he didn't want the responsibility, I reckon it was a fair bit to do with his humility. He didn't want to be seen to be taking all the glory. As funny as it sounds, at that time, he probably would now, but at that time, both goal kicking and his ability he was the quickest player I saw. He only ran as fast as he needed to do to get away from an opponent. It was, I reckon, to do with not showing someone up. And that was just him. And I think that's in his makeup. But he could have easily won the 100 in the Olympics. He's unbelievably quick, and we didn't see the best of it because he kept it in his back pocket. But
nice.
Fantastic. Fletch, we've talked about him as well. He's the prototype for your modern day player, the ones that are all uptight. Get him around to their place. Even now, he's just so affable, so likeable, so good to sit down and have a beer with and talk about what you're doing now and what you're doing, what we did in the past. Geez, he's a good fella, Dustin Fletcher. And the longevity of being in the comp was a fantastic feather in his cap as well.
Yeah. So let's go to number 3, and I actually have Wanganeen at number 3. I know it's fairly high, but I mean, I just rated him through the roof. Brownlow medalist. We've spoken about it before, so I won't go on too long, but he was one of those players that there's a few players that I kind of watch that just, I think they're just something so uniquely special. And we talk about the Tim Watsons in the 80s and I put kind of Wanganeen in that class. You know, I kind of have the Wanganeen, Baker, Mccurry, where there's guys that there's just something that's just different, that's extra special about what their craft is and what they can do on a football field. And I just rated him through the roof. And it was obviously a big loss, but for what he still did in the 90s, it was pretty amazing stuff. And for the age that he was to win a Brownlow then, even though I think it was only 17 votes or something like that, it was still an amazing accomplishment because not many backmen actually win Brownlows. So all credit to him. So I'll go to you, Ron.
I'm pretty sure he's the last backman to win a Brownlow, unless there's someone I'm not thinking of. All right, number 3, I've gone with Dustin Fletcher. 128 games in the 90s, 128 of, what was it, 862 that he ended up playing over 54 seasons. That puts him number 8 in the most games played in the 90s list. You know, to come into that 93 side and hold down that full back role or key defensive role in what was a premiership side. Funnily enough, you know, one of the performances that stays with me is the grand final. He played on sticks, Steve Kernahan, who kicked 7 goals in a grand final. And yet, you know, if you have a look at the record books, it'll sort of say, Jules, he towed like Fletcher. But it didn't sort of feel like that. You know, like Fletcher was, he never let his, he never sort of bowed his head. He never looked beaten by it. And he was left on him. I'm pretty sure he was left on him for the entirety of the game.
Well, he got lots of spoils in.
Yeah. So, and that again, and we talked about this last week, it comes back to that unflappable nature, that sort of ability just to, you know, concentrate the right moments, not to get too caught up in anything. Absolutely no doubt that was a huge part of him having such longevity.
Yeah.
It certainly enabled him to be a key player at a very, very early age. And, you know, he just got better and better, you know, magnificent, you know, the telescopic arms, the closing speed on an opponent in front of him, the judgment. And one thing I do want to say with him is that, you know, this sort of myth evolved about how I didn't play on the best forwards, you know. Well, one, that was a testament to his versatility, the fact that he could play on a guy like Phil Matera, as one of you guys mentioned last week.
Yeah.
But for a lot of that time too, you know, he was playing on the great key forwards in an era where footy was overflowing with them. You know, Modra, Sumic, Carey, Kernahan, Dunstall, Lockett. And funnily enough, the only one who I think consistently got the better of him was Sav Rocker. And, you know, Sav did get him a few times. But, you know, wonderful player, durable, easy, low maintenance for coaches and captains. A fantastic player. So, yeah, I've got him 3.
One of the few guys that can get thrown into a stand at the SCG, just jump back over the stand and just go back to his position. Not that you're going to take Plugger on and remonstrate anyway, but that's just the way he was. He just gets thrown into the 3rd row and jumps back over the fence and runs back to his position. And that's just kind of sums him up. It was very Michael Tuck kind of, you know, just
wiry.
Yeah.
Yep. Actually, one of my regrets with Fletcher's one of the great what might have beens, and that was when Dean Wallace took that mark in the 99 preliminary final.
Oh, don't. No, don't. Please don't. Yeah, I know what you're going to say. No, go on.
Well, you can just imagine, can't you, with 15 seconds to go, it's hand pass to Fletcher and he drills it from 60 metres.
Can I just say that
maybe I should forget about that innocent.
I was a I was very, very slow to appreciate the what Dean Wallace brought to the Essendon side. In fact, it became a running gag between me and the coach. And I remember the famous nil boys, nil goals game against St Kilda. The first thing Sheeds did when we rolled up for the press conference was to sort of grab me and say, "Hey, what do you think of him now?" Wait, and my response was, "Well, it's only taken him 5 years, Sheeds, but it well and truly won me over in '99." And then he threatened to undo it all with one very badly judged attempt to balk.
Oh, yes, that was odd.
So who have you got at number 3? Sorry, Neil.
I had Michael Long. So we've talked about him a bit there. Yeah, I had a bit higher than a few of you others there, and just a great player. And to be this high up in the rankings of all of us really just shows a testament to how good a player he was. And really, I think there was the fact that he's gone on to have such an impact in the general life in Australia as well. Shows what sort of a person he is, and as Gray said, very humble, yet obviously very confident of his abilities at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably one of the most enjoyable players to watch. I saw. I think.
Grant, how about your number 3?
3 Colemans, 12 times leading goal kicker, 5-time All-Australian, goal of the year, mark of the year, Essendon captain, Matthew Lloyd. What more can you say about 900 plus goals, an end of Etihad Stadium named after you? He was an incredible pickup for us. We gave up a few blokes to get him, but I well and truly think we got the better end of that deal. He could take a mark.
Delaney was a gun, mate.
Delaney was a gun. They'll kick it. I missed him.
And Ridley.
And Todd. But I think we truly got the better end of the stick. Lloydie he's just the full forward that if he laced him up again now and he was as good as he was back then, Essendon would be just in an incredible place. It's one of those full forwards that you dream of, who can take the great mark, who was reasonable on the ground, who had a good boot on him as well, and just absolutely was a great player during the 90s for the footy club.
I'll go on to you, Gary.
Yeah, 3 or 4. Essendon would win 3 or 4 more games a year if he was still playing for us. So that would be be the next level. So you'd have a real chance.
He probably still could play too.
He probably could, yeah. Just and like we mentioned, Fletch. Obviously, he played an era where it was 1-on-1 as well with all those champion forwards.
Yeah.
And we had 2 great players at the key posts at either end, and you sort of almost build your teams around them, don't you? So, Lloydie, I thought would keep playing at the end of his career. When he's 926, I thought he'd keep playing and try and get 1,000. But he had bigger fish to fry, and he's continued to improve himself as a person off the field as well. And he's forging a quite an impressive post-career in the media, and it's similar to everything he's done. He's worked hard at, and he's obviously working hard at being better in the media, week by week, month by month, year by year, and full credit to him. And obviously, top 3, you're going okay, and he probably did his best work in the 2000s too. So he's going to, if you continue on with that, he's going to be featuring really prominently in that area as well. But 3 good picks, obviously: Wang, Lloyd, Longy, and Fletch at the number 3 position here.
Just very quickly on Lloyd, you're quite right about how diligent he is about everything, and he has been with his media career. In fact, we got him aboard for the Sunday Age in 1999. I think, and I actually rang him up to ask him if he was interested, and I'm not sure if he was expecting it, but he thought about it, and he sort of came in, and he was very dutiful about what do I need to talk about, and doing his research, and you can see that everything he presents in the media sense is always well-informed, well-researched, but he never forgets sort of who helped him initially. And so every time he's won a few media awards now, and like any time he wins one now, I go, oh no, it's going to do it again, because he always makes a point of thanking me for you getting him involved in the age and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, it's very gratifying. But he's a very, there's a lot of pride in his performance, but there's a lot of humility about him too, and sort of never forgetting, how he got there,
Nice.
Yep. And with Longy too. You haven't lived until you've gone up the islands with their family. I know Jack has now passed on his father, but my God, we had the best 3 days, Longy, myself, David Whedon, Danny Corcoran, and Hurdy. And just to experience his life from where he came from, the big barbecue with barramundi, buffalo, out fishing and going to the spots where they knew the fish would bite, and having the people that respected the Long so much where they lived, and to have a campfire, guitars with his father and him singing, just fantastic memories.
Nice.
You're making me just a little bit jealous there, Gary, I must admit.
Yeah. Wish I could be there again.
Yeah.
Well, let's get on to the final two, and I don't have a drum roll, sorry, but my number 2 is Michael Long. Sorry, Matthew Lloyd. Is Michael Long. I won't go on too long. Obviously, Gary, you summed up Longy quite well. Just a few things for me. Obviously, for the club to have a statue of him as you walk in says a lot about who Michael Long is. I probably went a touch outside the criteria, if I'm being hand on heart. So obviously he's a fantastic player, but he's not just with Essendon. His impact to Essendon and AFL in general, I must admit, impacted me a lot. So I'm very transparent in saying there's a bit of bias towards that. But he was a person that I just looked up to quite a lot on how to treat people and how to respect people. And if you're talking my other criteria of playing well in big games, I don't think there's many that are too much better than in history than this guy. So that's my view on Michael Long. I have him at number 2 on a whole range of things that he accomplished in the 90s, and for me, he's my number 2, and I love him to death. I'll go to you, Ron.
All right, my number 2. Now, a couple of things need to be said here. First, you guys need to be suitably chastised for your disgraceful underrating of this player.
Well, we've already had one suspension.
Quite disgraceful. Secondly, never let it be said that I don't know how to suck up to people at the appropriate time. My number 2 is the man sitting right here alongside us, Mr. Gary O'Donnell.
Puts us to shame.
190, as Gary studiously looks at his notes so he doesn't have to hear this.
Writes his own name down on the list. Yeah.
It'll drive me to drink.
No, let's be serious. 197 games in the 90s. That puts him number 1 for games played in the 90s. Where do you start with this bloke? I think of Gary, I think of one of the last players in the competition to have a very traditional sort of upbringing into senior football, i.e. played a lot of reserves football. So by the time he came into that side, he absolutely cherry ripe to play. In fact, probably should have played earlier. Now, quickly, Gary, I'm right in saying, aren't I, first game, round 22 v Collingwood, 87? Correct, yep. There were a couple who debuted, wasn't there, from memory?
Just myself and Brendan Moore.
Brendan Moore, yeah, okay.
And
we lost.
They left out Roger Merritt and Shane Hurd.
That's right. So you playing probably cost us Roger Merritt because he went off to Brisbane after that. So thanks a lot. I remember that game, actually. It was a Sunday game, so it was like the last game of the season, and both sides out of finals contention, and they bloody beat us by 5 points. But, from the time this guy came into the side, he was everything about him was sure, sure-footed, sure disposal, the right decisions. And he played that back pocket defensive role absolutely perfectly and did it with aplomb. And similarly to having done that reserves apprenticeship, he then did a development, if you like, as a back pocket, which meant that when he began to play a lot more in the midfield, he was perfectly ready to take that on. And he made every poster winner as a midfielder too. And why I think, please don't get embarrassed, Gary, I think sometimes he doesn't get the kudos he deserves because he was efficient, and I call Leon Baker efficient. This guy was very, very similar to that. Never made a wrong decision. His disposal was always spot on. You know what they've had that 93 preliminary final on so many times recently, and I'm sort of sick of watching it, believe it or not. But one of the moments that always stays with me is that moment where I think scores a level or Essendon's a few points behind in the last quarter. There's a bit, ball's sort of bobbling around. It comes out to Gary as soon as he gets his hands on the footy, and he's like 40 metres out. And Bruce McAvaney calls it too. He goes, he should go here, and he does. He was never, ever going to miss that. Like, Gary never made mistakes at a critical moment, in the same way that Bomber Thompson did that as well. And that served him well in the back pocket. It served him brilliantly as an on-baller. Also, strong body, could ride the bumps and hand them out as well. Incredibly disciplined, incredibly team-orientated. I'd also say this too, that as good as Longie's game in the 93 grand final was, this bloke was so close to getting that Norm Smith medal. He just played an absolutely superb game that afternoon. He continued to do it right through the 90s. He was incredibly durable, didn't get injured much, captained the side. I feel was probably wound up a little bit prematurely. Then went on and, had a really good coaching career as an assistant to Lethal up in Brisbane. He's, not that that's relevant to this, but this guy, okay, he didn't sort of have the spectacular highs. He didn't have the high leap or the booming kick, but everything he did was correct and right. And they're the sort of footballers you need in your side, perhaps even more than the stars who can be a little bit erratic. These guys are the glue that holds your side together. And I just couldn't go past him at number 2.
Can I change my vote?
Bravo. Bravo.
And Gary, I did text you my address, didn't you, for the check?
Every award I ever win in the future, I'll thank you for naming me where you've named me tonight. So
as you should.
Just like Lloyd, you've got another ally.
As you should.
That's everything you said is true there, Gary. Sorry, Rowan. And I think Gary's the sort of player that every coach and every club would love to have. Because of the, as you say, didn't put a foot wrong, but it's just the consistency. It's both the consistency in not only during a game, but in preparation and the way he went about a game. And that led to just a very small difference, as we talked on previously, between his highs and lows. You knew what you were going to get every game. If he was given a role, it was like a set and forget thing. You would give it to him and you know that it's going to get done to the best of his ability. If he wasn't up to it, which wasn't too often, that's a different thing. But you knew that he would do everything he could to perform the role as well as he possibly could. I didn't have him quite as high myself, because while, with all due respect to Gary, while I appreciate all those attributes, and he would be one of the first blokes you'd build a club around. But I thought some of the other players that we had, the Mccurrys, the Longs, the Lloyds, were more able to actually win games than.
Go on, Neil. Tear him down.
I was just going to say, geez. The bloke's sitting right there.
Just a gentle discussion.
One of my other qualities is the ability to take criticism. So go for your life.
So Gary, I've got to ask you, Gary, have you got any great stories about Gary O'Donnell?
Oh, not that can be told. Like James Hird used to always say, "Oh, Gary, yep, he was diligent here, he's a great role model, this, that, the other." And off season, and get him out and away from the public eye, he was Yeah, he was a changed man. You heard about the Brownlow, didn't you? The Monday, the Bobby McGee situation where he just won the Brownlow in '96 and we didn't get in because it was an industry night. So there's one, but I'm trying to clean it up here.
We don't want the clean ones. That's what we're here for.
That first, my last footy trip, here we go. My last footy trip was in '98 after the club had moved me on. And I reckon most players get told to move on. There's only a few lucky 10% maybe that realise, yep, it's the end for me and I should move on. Some think, okay, we might be able to just get over season and keep going. I got told, and that's fair enough. That's life. But '98, we went to Bali. I'd never been to Bali before, and I was rooming with Steve Alessio. We were at the Hard Rock Hotel in Bali. Beautiful hotel, beautiful setting. I'd got home at daybreak. I'd been out, and Seth is in bed, and I walk in. He goes, "Gary, have a look in the mirror." I go, "Yeah, what?" "Have a look in the mirror." I looked in the mirror, and my big bushy eyebrows, I'd lost one. And I'd fallen asleep at, I think it was the Bounty Hotel, but their motel side by the pool. And Dean Wallace and Che Cockatoo Collins got to me. So, bang, gone. They blamed it on my brother Kevin, who was also there at Springvale with their footy club. But the problem was, a week later, I was starting at the Brisbane Lions Footy Club under the great Lee Matthews as an assistant coach with an eyebrow gone. So there's one good story for you. But, just don't fall asleep. And I think that night, our theme was you had to wear a dress. So you had to go out and buy a dress. So I was not only with one eyebrow, I was in a dress as well. So there you go. Nice.
I was hoping for the Hangover Part 3 there. You wake up with a tiger in your room.
That's it.
Or a tat that I've had to have surgically removed.
Hey, sorry. Do you go, Grant?
Yeah, I just want one real quick question, and it's not the probably the nicest question, but it's always interests me. You said you got moved on by the club, right? How does that happen? Like, what did you get called into with Sheeds or?
Yeah, no, sure. It was Sheeds and Matty Drain where they delivered the news. I'd got wind it was happening anyway, and yeah, fair enough. That's fine. They used to have. So I was vice president of the Players Association at one point, and when they had the salary cap rule, veterans list rule, where your veterans, half their salary, I wasn't on much anyway, but half your salary was in the salary cap, so that they kept older blokes on.
Yeah.
And I said to Sheeds, look, I haven't really made up my mind, next year, 99, do you want to, is there a chance, it'll only be half the salary and, it was not, that's it, you're done. The match committee had made their choice, and that's to be respected. And you know what? It was the best decision because I probably only had possibly half a year in me anyway. And so you cut your losses and you go. But the thing that annoyed me was there was a leak on the board of the club. And so I left that meeting saying, okay, we'll leave it for 24 hours to work out how we're going to announce it and how we go through that. And then back page of the paper the next day, it's on the Herald Sun, it's O'Donnell sacked. The back page, I was beside myself
That's not cool.
with how that happened. And it wasn't Sheeds' fault, it wasn't Matty Drain's fault. It was on the board that board members like to be supporters at some point.
Yeah.
And they go, I know something that will make me more important for the person I know and release it to. And all of a sudden you're back page. That really hurt me. And if I could take that back, I would, if I take one thing back in the time machine, you'd sort of almost announce it straight away. You walk out of that meeting and you'd go, well, these days I'd put it on my Instagram or on Twitter. Thanks for the memories, Essendon, and I'm going off into the sunset. You can have some control, but that was really disappointing, that part.
Okay.
Just quickly, Neil, we'll go to you. Can we quickly do our number twos because we're just running out of time? Just so,
okay. Right.
And we'll then go on to the one.
I don't know who the number one's going to be, but
my
number two was Matthew Lloyd. And one of the reasons I had him so high was that you look at his record here, 63 goals in 97, 70 goals in 98, 87 goals in 99. There's been virtually nobody else at the club that has kicked those sort of numbers as a full forward, going right back to sort of Jeff Blethyn.
I think I told you last week, Neil, I kicked 87. I did kick 87.
Yes, that's true. And so did he.
took me 14 years.
But yeah, and considering how young he was, started in 95, and you know, as about a 19-year-old to come on and kick 63 goals in a year is fantastic. And he was very much in the late 90s the focal point of the forward line. He's even better, obviously, in the 2000s, but that's why I had him up so high in the 90s.
And how about you, Grantis?
My number 2, Wangers. Incredibly, again, that you mentioned the rubber man before. He must have been so ridiculously hard to tackle, because he'd take. I often watched him take off with his feet, and you get all your drive through your feet and your legs, but then his hips would be like sideways, but his legs would still be going underneath, and the players are trying to grab him, and they wouldn't know where to go because his body would move this way and move that way. Incredible player. I see a little bit. Hopefully it grows. I see a little bit of Andy McGrath. Wangers in Andy McGrath. In that sometimes he'll be in a pack, he'll twist, he'll turn, and he'll get out of the pack. So Gavin Wanganeen, incredible footballer, like freaky good footballer. So love that bloke to death.
Look, for the sake of time, I thought we'll quickly go to number 1 now, and I'll let you sort of close, Gary. Now, number 1, I think if we're all sort of serious, we don't even have to do a drum roll. I thought
you went for Russell Williams as well.
yes.
Julian Kersner. I went for Julian Kersner.
Aaron Henneman. Yeah. So James Hird's obviously my number 1, and I'm going to make the assumption it's everyone's number 1.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to let Gary and Rowan talk about James Hird, the footballer. But I will say this, a story that I've never really told many people, and it actually involves Rowan. And I've never, but this is not a 90s story. This is unfortunately a more of a sadder 2014 story. So James Hird, obviously, pretty much my hero. Like Tim Watson was in the 80s. James Hird's obviously my heroes, brought up in my time frame, I guess. Obviously, the saga going on. James Hird's getting pelted left, right, and centre for at least 16 months, and from 2013, and I kind of, as a fan who owned a Facebook site of about 5,000 and a bit of a Twitter following, I kind of feel like no one's actually sticking up for this guy as far as I can see, as either from a fan base or sometimes even from club or anything. So I approached Rowan Connolly and I just wrote to him and said, look, I've written a little piece. Would it ever be considered that it went into your paper, The Age, which back then, ironically, The Age was probably our number 1 enemy. I'm sorry, Rowan, but it just was. It was a Essendon bashing machine, if I'm being completely honest. And I kind of wrote to Rowan and said, would you ever consider writing this article or help me get it published? Because I think what's lost in this is James Hird, the person, and James Hird, the footballer, and no one's actually heard from him. At that point, James Hird had actually had basically a gag clause by the club, so he couldn't really speak on the issue. I said, so we hadn't even heard from him. So I wrote a piece on just James Hird's career and just saying, isn't it time we actually have a bit of respect and a bit of pause about who this person is and wait till we see on the other end where things lay out. And Rowan was amazing. So Rowan got a hold of the guy that was more in the editorial letters section instead of the sports section. He was fairly blunt and said, I don't think this will get through the sports section. And then before I knew it, and he helped out with a few grammar issues and a few cleanups. But before I knew it, there was the article, and it just exploded because no one had seen an article like that in the Age. And I had Mark Robertson writing to me and all these journalists writing to me saying, we can't say it out loud, but this needed to be said. Thanks. And it's an article called James Hurd's story, Essendon Story Is Yet to Be Told. And I just want to make sure people understood that about Rowan also as a person and at the time. And it wasn't just me, and he was a tremendous help. So I'll let Rowan now talk about James Hurd, the player, but I just wanted to actually just acknowledge what you do behind the scenes and what a good person you are. And for doing these past 6 shows, it has only heightened my, you was and possibly in our top 10 journalists poll. So
I appreciate that.
Journalist list.
For a horrible second, I thought you were going to make me your number 1 player of the night. But, no, thanks. I really do appreciate that, Scott. Thanks. But look, I mean, it happens. People will solicit, or people will make contact with us and say, what, I want to write this piece. What's the best way of approaching it? And I remember you doing that. And I did think, and I think rightly, that, there were some entrenched agendas with some people in the sports section that was going to make it difficult. But I knew the sort of opinion pages might, were often keener on taking contrasting points of view. So, I was pretty open with everyone at the Age that, I sort of encouraged him to do it and blah, blah, blah. And he did a really good job on it. So, well done yourself. Just on Hurdy, so I saw his first game, which was that first game of the 92 season, the Brad Fox strangle game.
Yep.
And Hurdy didn't do a lot in that game, and he got injured. I think he might have even got a punctured lung or something, a rib injury, or it was fairly serious. And he didn't reappear until late in the season. So he sort of flew under the radar. And I'd seen him a little bit in the twos and thought, he's pretty promising. But I think a lot of people, even at Essendon, Gary might correct me on this, but I was genuinely surprised at how quickly he developed. So he looked pretty good in those last few games in 92 when he played. But even by the 93 pre-season, you remember Essendon won that, he was ready to fly. He'd become a leader of that team over summer, and demonstrated just how good a footballer he was. And he just kept getting better and better and better. So, there's a 3 consecutive best and fairest in the 90s. In terms of games played, Plenty played more. He played 110 games in the 90s. So there's a good 10 or 11 ahead of him in terms of numerically, but no one ahead of him for impact. And then as he got more experience, that capacity to be thrown into various positions where Essendon needed the lift. And of course, he did that on the ball. He did it forward. He did it at times in defence. The absolute number 1 standout quality for me, as well as the obvious, the cat-like reflexes. Never seen a better player on the ground at ground level. His ability to win the ball at ground level and use it cleanly while even off balance, remarkable, incredible balance. But for me, it's one ability, and I've seen it in so few players, and I'll name them: Gary Ablett, Wayne Carey, Tony Lockett. I'd possibly have Michael Voss in there. But Hurdy along with him, and that is the ability to go, right, my side needs me now. I am going to win this game, or I'm going to save this game. And he did it. And how many times did we see him do it?
Yeah.
Most memorably probably in that West Coast game where he got the 15 touches in the last quarter, kicked the goal, had sex with the guy over the fence, gave him a nice hug.
And no Brownlow votes.
He'd sort of shat in the nest there a bit, hadn't he, really? But, just an amazing, amazing footballer. And you just knew when he got by 50-odd games, every time he got the ball, you knew something good was going to happen with it. The number of amazing goals he snapped over his shoulder, et cetera, et cetera. We all know how good he was. I don't need to elaborate anymore. Just a wonderful, wonderful.
And his Anzac Day stuff, you talk about the West Coast game, but the one where he kicked 5 goals and just dominated the last quarter. And when you've got a highlight where Dean Rioli's looking at you and wonder going, how did you do that? You know you're good when Dean Rioli's saying, this guy's really good.
One of my favourite Hurdy moments is from the first Anzac Day game when scores were level with 5 minutes to go, and he got the ball in the forward pocket and screwed it over his shoulder, and that put Essendon in front until Rocker took the big hanger and levelled the scores again. Just what a one of the greatest players of all time.
Yep.
He's certainly the best Essendon player I've ever seen. That's including the 80s. Including Madden and Watson, who's amazing. I'd almost go as far as to say that I think in the wider football community he's actually underestimated. I think one of the things I always said from very early on, I used to take binoculars to the football, and I'd historically I'd watch the game live and then I'd go back and watch it on television, and you couldn't see on television what you saw in the binoculars. The stuff he did, just the little taps and the little hand passes out. Just about every time you go back and hear a commentary during those days, and they'll say the ball's in a pack and it comes out to O'Donnell who runs into an open goal. And just about every time that happened, it was heard. It's just amazing that the stuff that didn't get picked up, unless you could really see in close, and that's the thing that I remember most about him, is just a freakish player.
Yep.
Oh, Grant.
He walked into the club, humility, respect, knew the history of the club, obviously, with 2 generations above him. He loved the club. He had respect for senior players. One of his first sessions might have been the first session at training with the seniors at Cross Keys in pre-season. He ran with the flight and took this mark where it wasn't quite the Jonathan Brown, Nick Rewald type mark, but it was something where everyone just went, oh, gee, look at him. Who can do that? He read the ball 0.5 of a second quicker than the best blokes that have ever played. Equal with Simon Black. The 2 of them were the best with knowing where the ball was going. If he, as the match winner, if he wanted the ball, he got it. If it was in his area, he generally got it. One knock on him, she used to always have a crack at him about his kicking and his ball drop. And he wasn't the best kick ever in that regard, like just field kick, but it just seemed to be effective. He'd hit a target, and as was mentioned, I think, Rowan, he'd just be able to kick a goal from anywhere. He knew where the 2 big sticks were under pressure without having to look. He just had that sense. So you couldn't go past him in the 90s. You probably can't go past him in the 2000s as well. Wonderful player, and is he top 3 all time on the club's list of champions of Essendon? And that may well be debatable as well. Who knows? But you just couldn't go past him.
Yep.
Yeah, well said.
Well, is that? Are we all done?
I think we are.
Well, thank you so much, Gary, for joining us for the 4th series. I've kind of signed you up for 1 and then fished you in for the other 3s. But thank you so much. Look, we're eternally grateful. You're welcome on the show anytime. And look, we wish you all the best in this interesting times with the virus and everything. Wish family, health, safety, and well wishes. And again, we can't thank you enough for supporting the show and just sharing your thoughts.
Where can we find you? Where can we find you, Gary?
Well, I'm in Perth.
Yeah.
Give
us a plug. Give us a plug.
But I'm in isolation. So Simon Black Academy, diploma of sports manager development we do through Torrens University, but it's a footy academy. There's one in Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide as well. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here. You guys are in my top 10 of podcasts around Australia.
Except for Grant, who's number 11.
No.
Just don't forget, Gary, 3 zeros on the end of that check, please.
Minimum.
Yeah.
Also to you, Rowan, absolutely. Thank you very much for being a part of this as well. I know we've been taking an hour and a half of yourself and Gary's time. Us three, we'd sit here and talk to you guys for 5 straight hours if we could. So we really appreciate you coming on our dinky little podcast and giving the kind of insight and the kind of knowledge that definitely our listeners and our watchers now on YouTube, they're definitely giving us the feedback that kind of insight and that kind of knowledge that you have, Gary, has been incredible for the podcast. So thank you as well, Rowan. And where can they find you?
Footyology.com.au is the website, Footyology podcast. Mainly these days I tend to hang out on Twitter, which is Rowan_Connolly. Actually, this will win me some fans. I actually did a Hawthorn podcast last Saturday night.
Oh, bloody hell.
Which was, they got me on to talk about the rivalry. It was good fun, actually. It was a very respectful discussion. So you can have rivalry and keep it relatively civil. But no, it's been a lot of fun, guys. Really enjoyed it.
And just quickly, before we go, check out Rowan's top 10 grand finals from 1990 onwards. It's a fantastic series.
Number 1 tomorrow.
Yeah, you can go his YouTube channel and look forward to his.
Just quickly, Scott, sorry, I'm blowing my cover a bit. Oh, no, I'm not, because people won't hear this till later. But I can just let you know a little secret. If you didn't like what I just said before about Hawthorn podcast, number 1 grand final, Hawthorn losers.
Yeah. Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
Like it.
So you've got number 2 Collingwood lose and number 1 Hawthorn lose. So
every second grand final, Collingwood loses. Come on, you know.
Hey.
So that's instant respect. Look, thank you both guys. Have a great night, and thank you listeners for sticking us with this series and supporting the show and all the amazing comments. We have no idea what we're going to do next, but we'll think of something fun. But yeah, for this series, thank you so much, and goodbye, everyone, from the Lunchtime Catch Up podcast.
Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.